Okay, thanks everyone. Welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. It's all news, all politics at the 4 o'clock hour here downtown. Nothing more political than the House Minority Whip, Representative Blake Filippi.
Happy to be here.
I would say that about any representative that came in, so I'm not saying you're the most political, but lots going on in the political realm right now in Rhode Island. Let's start national because it's just the news today.
Sure.
What we've heard with DACA coming out of the Trump administration. Obviously, his call to rescind it, basically have it run through March. What have you heard today here at the local level? What do you expect to happen or hear here in Rhode Island now that we've heard what I think folks were expecting to hear all along from the Trump administration?
Well, I think people are very concerned, and justifiably so. I think we need to assess the policy in the state, the level of cooperation we have with federal immigration officials. You know, under the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, it's called the anti-commandeering doctrine. Even if a law is constitutional under federal law, they can't co-opt our state officials to enforce it. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversation at the State House in the coming session about the level of cooperation we have with federal immigration authorities. As to DACA, I think that it raises the problem of executive orders. Mm-hmm. You know, you have an executive order, you don't go through the legislature, you don't have a law passed, and the next administration can just repeal the executive order. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something we need to be cognizant of with policy, is that maybe sometimes executive orders aren't the right way to forward policy because it can be undone. As to DACA, I think there are substantial questions as to whether it's constitutional or not. The federal immigration law says one thing, you can't change the law through executive order. You can't say that someone who under federal law can't legally work can work. And whether it's the right policy or not, I don't think is the issue. I think the concern is you have an executive order contravening federal law. I think the vast majority of people want to help these kids. We want to make sure the dreamers can stay, and we need to do it right through passing a law, not through executive fiat.
Taking up a lot of oxygen moving forward. I mean, it is a federal issue, but impacts obviously folks at the state level. Do you see this being something that's going to be discussed and debated in the coming months?
I think the only role for the state to play in this immigration debate, as I said earlier, is our level of cooperation with federal officials. I think it's going to take a lot of oxygen out of the room in Washington, and I think you're going to see people become more and more active here on this issue, but it's not really a Rhode Island State House issue.
Speaking of Rhode Island State House issues and things taking up a lot of oxygen, coming up, the Senate finance hearings for the PawSox. You've been very outspoken about this. What do you expect to see? Do you moving forward at these hearings, a lot of folks are saying, is it a fait accompli? Is it a rubber stamp? Are the people really going to have their say? What do you think?
I hope that people have their say. I'm not too confident that the right decision is going to be made. I think we all need to be very active on this. The citizens need to make their voices heard. I'm just concerned about the whole process. I mean, the fact that they're calling this economic development when it just isn't economic development. You have have-to-haves and nice-to-haves. This is a nice-to-have. And if that's what we want, if we want to spend the people's money on nice-to-haves, let's just say it. Stop calling it economic development. Say, hey, we want a nice ballpark because it would be good for the people to have this nice thing. And if we can start just by saying that, I think we'd have a more honest debate going forward. The notion that this is somehow economic development where we're going to laterally transfer some jobs from the existing stadium to the new stadium, I think it's folly, and we need to be spending our time and the people's resources on real economic development. I think we need to focus on having more free market economics. We need to have a government not trying to pick winners and losers and figuring out how to drive this economy. We need to make the whole state the most attractive place for capital. Instead, what we've done is we've made it so capital doesn't want to come into the state of Rhode Island. And the way you open up a business and succeed and do well is by going to commerce and maybe hiring the right lobbyists and getting a government handout. I mean, that is central planning. And central planning has failed all over the world. The 20th century proves that. I think we need to focus on free enterprise, free markets, making capital want to come here because it's treated the best in the state of Rhode Island.
Do you think this is going to be a campaign issue in 18 here in Rhode Island? Let's talk gubernatorial campaign.
Can we stand the PawSox for a second? Because I have a great idea, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Okay, let's stay on the PawSox. Then we'll go to politics.
Okay, let's do it. So I don't think the government should be involved. I think if the owners can make this work, they should do it themselves. They should invest their own money, make it work. The plan on the table now has the state putting, I think, $1.1 million a year to pay this debt, and has the city of Pawtucket putting in a substantial nut also. Let's do this. Let's say the state doesn't put up any cash. The owners put in their own cash. They seek the financing. They're very wealthy people. The state will then guarantee a portion of the increased tax revenues they're telling us we're going to have. Take a portion of the increased tax revenues and dedicate that to paying off the debt that the owners took out on the Pawsox.
So
no risk on the people.
Funny worry about this.
Yeah, no risk on the people whatsoever. If the project goes defunct, we haven't guaranteed anything. There's no bonds. We're not putting up any of our tax money that we already have. This is simply saying if there is an increase in tax revenues, like they're telling us is going to happen, we'll use that increase to pay off a little bit of the debt.
You calling this the Whip Filippi plan?
No. It doesn't have a name yet, but it has a good ring to it.
I might have just coined it the Whip Filippi plan here.
But it makes perfect sense. No risk on the taxpayers. If there's upside for the taxpayers, we'll use a little bit of that money to pay down the debt. It's the smartest way to go forward. If we want the government to be involved in the first place, I don't think the government should be anywhere near it. But if we're going to play that game, let's do it in a way where there's no risk on the taxpayers. And the people who are telling us there's going to be a boom in tax revenues, things are going to be great, put the risk on them. Okay, we're going to pretend, we're going to go on the assumption that that's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, the risk's on you.
Well, right now, currently, if correct me if I'm wrong, the backstop is the city of Pawtucket. And we know the economic situation of which the city of Pawtucket finds itself. Do you think that there's, the 38 Studios hangover, do you think that it's pervasive here in Rhode Island?
It is. It is. And it is a hangover. And I think one of the reasons it's a hangover, because I don't think there's ever been an independent prosecutor. I mean, the governor, when she was running for office, said, I will appoint an independent prosecutor to get to the bottom of this. I think we need to have someone from out of state come here and do a report, just like what kind of similar to what happened when there was a credit union crisis. The reason we got over the credit union crisis and we had faith in the system again is because there was full disclosure about what happened, what went down. And I just feel with 38 Studios, there hasn't been that thing that the taxpayers need to get over this hangover. I think people justifiably are skeptical because of 38 Studios. And it doesn't help that I think the total bonded indebtedness that the state and the city of Pawtucket are going to take on is $38 million. Do 39 or 37.
The magic number.
Yeah, why did they do 38? I mean, it's...
the not so magic number. So, currently the plan, as you outlined, that is going to be the one heard, and I'm sure folks will bring up their alternative approaches at these hearings, so to speak. But again, you see some support. You see support within the Pawtucket community, the surrounding businesses who think that this could be a catalyst to move the state forward. Obviously, you see it from the building trades. They're looking at jobs, and talking about how their membership needs it. But what happens when you see this outpouring of opposition? We saw it back when they first looked at 195 here, and what happened with that. If they go through this process and they say it's fully vetted, and the folks have had their say, and they move through with the plan as it is, does this become a campaign issue in 18?
I think it does. As to their prior plan in Providence, I think they made a big mistake with it. I think it poisoned the well. I mean, this plan, this deal, is better than that one. But that one was so against the taxpayers' interests and was such a government handout to this rich conglomerate of businessmen that, honestly, I think that was a horrible move because people look at the current deal as highly problematic because they're viewing it through that lens. Even viewed on its own, I think the current deal is problematic. It will become a campaign issue because I think the philosophical debate you're seeing in the state is between central planning and free market economics. And it transcends the political boundaries. You have the great Libertarian Party and the progressive movement in the state united in opposition to this handout of taxpayer money to a bunch of wealthy individuals who can finance it on their own. So I think it will become a campaign issue, and I think people need to stand on the right side of this.
So talking about the campaign, looking at 18, we have yet to see former Republican gubernatorial candidate Alan Fung. He's focusing a lot on Cranston. What do you see moving forward within the Republican Party?
Wow. Okay. Within the Republican Party, I think that there is within the Republican Party is becoming more of the New England Republicans, the John Chafee Republicans, and I think that's where the Republican Party has to go, and it's more of the libertarian message, which is fiscally conservative, do whatever you want with your life, we don't care what goes on in your home. And I see within the Republican Party that's kind of the the two sides is the National Republican Party, the people who care about social issues, versus the libertarian, free market-oriented people. And I respectfully suggest that the way the Republican Party is going to win and grow the number of seats, not only general office seats, but seats in the legislature, which has to happen because 85% are controlled by Democrats, and that's not healthy. I think the way that the Republicans are going to regain ground in the state is to become more of the John Chafee Republicans, is to be more libertarian, focus on money, and don't focus on people's personal lives. Who cares what you do with your personal life?
So how do you, as someone who's an elected official, let's talk, a little bit about President Trump. We do see where his approval ratings are. I'm sure there are things you agree with the president on. I'm sure there are things you disagree with the president on. What do you do when you're out walking the district and folks, might have some issues with the president and they say, you're a Republican? What do you say to that?
I say that Congress, I think, had a 16% approval rating before President Trump got elected.
The problem was there.
Yeah, the problem was there, and I'm actually kind of happy that Trump's there, and maybe for a lot of the reasons that people don't see. I'm happy he's there because other branches of government are going to start taking back the power that has been given to the executive. We, over the years, have created an imperial presidency where they exercise legislative authority, where they pass executive orders that legislate to control our lives. I think that it's good because the other branches of government, because maybe they're a little repulsed by Donald Trump, are going to start pulling some of the power away from the executive branch and re-imbuing it back in the judiciary and the legislative branch.
So the pendulum might be swinging back.
And not only the pendulum within the three branches of the federal government, I want the pendulum to return power to the states. And it's interesting, I've always been someone who believes in the 10th Amendment. I spoke about it earlier. A few years ago, my friends on the left were anathema to the 10th Amendment. When Barack Obama was the president, they thought the 10th Amendment was a horrible, horrible thing, that all power should be vested in the federal government. Now I have my friends on the left marching around demanding that the 10th Amendment be recognized, state sovereignty, state rights, and ultimately I think that's the direction the country has to go, is to have a much smaller federal government and much stronger state governments. So I'm happy Donald Trump is there because now I think you're going to see a growing movement, not only on the right, which has existed for a long time, but people on the left are going to start saying, what is the proper role of the federal government? What is the proper role of state governments? And I think that you're going to see more assertions of the 10th Amendment and more assertions of state sovereignty, and ultimately I think that's the way to go in this country. Just look at Obamacare, right? You had a couple people elected to the Senate and a few to the House, and you could have a dramatic change in a policy that deeply affects our personal lives. Healthcare should not be resolved on the federal level, because you can get a new president and a few new members of Congress elected, and the whole thing gets upended. It should be handled at the state level. Federal government should be that big. Focus on the military. Take down state barriers to interstate commerce. Don't tell us how to educate our children. It's garbage. Federal government doesn't have the authority to tell us how to educate our kids. Don't tell us how to zone our neighborhoods through HUD. There's just a list of federal programs that no one can show me where in the Constitution they have that authority. And it's usurped our sovereignty as not only a state, but as individuals it's taken it away, because my constituents have my cell phone number. Right? They can call me and say, hey, Blake, what's going on with this? People in the state can wrap their head around the state budget. You can't wrap your head around the federal budget.
No.
You can't.
It's a little complicated.
It's a distant, faraway government that controls so many aspects of our life. And that's just not healthy. It's not the way the country was designed, and it needs to change. So getting back to your original question, I'm happy Donald Trump is there because people are finally starting to say, let's have a federal government that is that big, that really can't affect our lives, and let's have strong states again. And I think ultimately over the next few decades, that's the grand movement in the United States, is going to be a reallocation of authority between the federal government and the states. And I'm all for it. Shrink the federal government down.
So all about state government, you're going to be back up there before you know it. For that
God willing.
Rare animal. Well, no, I'm actually talking about this fall session. I'm not even talking about so focused on re-election, Blake. No, I'm talking about this month. I'm talking about finishing up the existing session before we get ahead of our skis. What do you expect seeing for the special session? There's some outstanding items. Do you think we'll see quicken, in and out, or do you think there'll be, some protracted debate on things?
I think it's going to be in and out, but as you know, the Republican caucus, we stand and we debate on a lot of issues. There's this domestic firearm. They call it the domestic abuser bill. I think the original version was highly problematic because it ripped discretion away from our judiciary and mandated that people have their firearms taken from them. I think the Senate is changing it and maybe putting some of that discretion back in the judges, which I think is proper.
Okay.
So I don't know what the final product is going to be. I envision that it's going to be like an in and out session, but we are going to continue to raise issues on behalf of the people of the state of Rhode Island.
So talk with us, being whip. What's it like, to be the House Minority Whip? You saw it in action when you were first in office. You get the position. Do folks have any understanding how hard it is?
No, they don't. Before I got elected, if anyone said to me that it should be a full-time legislature, I would have said, they don't deserve it, make it 1 month, get them out. Because it's like, what's the old saying, nobody's pocketbook is safe while the legislature is in session. But now that I'm up there, the issues are so complex. To I think, really dig in and advocate properly, we need to be in session longer. We just do. We deal with a $9 billion budget, and everything comes down the pike in the last month. The process needs to change. So you're asking as whip, did I expect this, or as a rep did I expect?
Well, even more as whip. I mean, as you said, the amount of legislation that, first of all, elected officials have to digest, and then from the budgetary standpoint, as those things you said come down the pipe late in session. Is it even more difficult in that sort of leadership role to be able to digest everything there and the messaging and again how to get the minority caucus to vote?
It is, because before I became the whip, I was on 3 committees and I focused on the issues in those 3 committees. But now that I'm in the minority leadership, we need to have an understanding of the bills that come out of every committee. We need to formulate how to respond to them. We need to formulate the legal and policy arguments. So there is more work. But we have a great team. Our Republican caucus is filled with really smart people that feed information up to us. So if there's a committee that I'm not sitting on, I can go to the 2 or 3 members we have on that committee and ask them, what's going on with this bill? What was the public testimony? How do we formulate arguments against it? And more importantly, how do we change the bill? A lot of what happens up there, whether it's good, bad, wrong, right, or indifferent, is conversations that aren't on camera. If there's a real issue with a bill, we will go up to the 3rd floor. And the speaker is extremely receptive to arguments from our side. Surprisingly so. Before I got up there, I thought it was a very contentious body. But for the most part, people want to do the right thing. And if you bring an issue that maybe they didn't see, that didn't come out during committee hearing, they amend the bill. There's probably 15 to 20 pieces of legislation over the past 3 years that I've been involved in where I would have voted no, but I was able to bring an issue upstairs, and they changed it, which made a bad bill better, or acceptable, or good. And it's a collaborative process. It's not like Washington. It really isn't. It really is not.
As you said, looking for the power to be back in the states, but I kind of ran you through the gamut between DACA, between the POSOX, between going back in session. Anything that, before we let you go, that you want folks to know while you're here in studio?
Wow. I just want to remind people to get involved. I think Alexis de Tocqueville said it, and Abraham Lincoln repeated it. People get the government they deserve. If people aren't involved, then you won't get good government. And I think the biggest problem in this country isn't those with whom we disagree. The biggest problem in this country is people who don't have an opinion. So I just encourage everyone to reach out to your state reps, research the issues, come to the State House and testify on bills, because it just makes the process better. It really does. When you hear from all different people, it makes better legislation. It raises issues we may not have thought of unless we had that testimony.
Well, speaking of testimony, all eyes are going to be on the Senate side. I know the House is looking to see what steps they're going to take, but of course the Assembly is going to be back in before we know it. So I'm sure we'll talk soon. I appreciate you finally being able to join us here in the studio. Well, I know you're busy. There's always something popping up, so no, I do appreciate your coming. I'm sure we'll have you back in soon.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll let you go around the corner.